Keep that map red or make it blue. Wolf?
Jeff Greenfield will be checking back with you, obviously, throughout the night. Right now, 6 states are about to close in 6 seconds from now. Once all those states, the precincts are closed, we'll be able to start bringing you results of this election. And right now, we can project that George W. Bush, the President of the United States, will carry several states in among these first states that are up for grabs. The President will win. We can project Indiana and its 11 electoral votes, Kentucky and its 8 electoral votes, and Georgia and its 15 electoral votes. We can project that John Kerry will carry the New England state of Vermont and its 3 electoral votes. So far, we do not have enough information yet to be able to project a winner in either Virginia or South Carolina. But Jeff Greenfield, the race for the White House is moving forward right now at this extremely early moment in this night. Bush already, according to our projection, has 34 electoral votes. Kerry has 3. The blue state, Vermont, is for Kerry. The red states are for Bush.
That's right. This is the calm before the storm. None of these results are anything but expected. But I think the best way to tell these voters where we expect to be is where we wound up 4 years ago in 2000. And if we can switch to that map, and I'll start talking before that map is on, back in 2000, George W. Bush won. He won the South, he won the Mountain West, he won, of course, Florida, he won Ohio and Missouri, and Al Gore won New England, the Middle Atlantic states, the Upper Midwest, the Industrial Midwest, with the significant exception of Ohio. He won, of course, Florida. Now, if the map looks like this when tonight is over, George W. Bush will be reelected with 278 electoral votes because population shifted into the red states. So, the Kerry strategy, obviously, takes something away from the president. For instance, if he were to win Ohio, a state beset by almost 250,000 job losses, that alone would put Kerry over the top. He also has designs, not surprisingly, on Florida, with 27 electoral votes, by far the biggest battleground state up for grabs. He's looking as well at New Hampshire, up here in New England, which Al Gore lost by only 7,000 votes. That's a state that Nader affected. So, what about the Bush strategy? They say they have a shot at Pennsylvania, a state that George Bush has visited more than any other state except his home in Texas. They're looking at Michigan, where they think social conservatism might play among the so-called Reagan Democrats, and Wisconsin, another state that Al Gore only carried by 0.2% of the vote. So you can see throughout the night, Wolf, we'll be showing viewers how these states affect the outcome. We need one more thing to show you. If we can go back to the 2000 map and give John Kerry New Hampshire with 4 electoral votes and Nevada with 5 electoral votes, guess what we have? A tie at 269 votes each, and welcome to 2004, where the House of Representatives would choose the president. It's unlikely, Wolf, just as unlikely as an election that came down to 537 votes and hanging chads in Florida.
The new House of Representatives as well would be making that decision if there were a tie. Let's talk about some turning points, some moments that you are looking at right now, what we should be looking at throughout these hours to come.
Right. Well, as we look back at this campaign, I think we can see a couple of critical turning points that affected this campaign. The first one was Iowa. John Kerry was virtually counted out before 2000 began. He said, I'm going to make Iowa a do-or-die state. He won those caucuses and was never headed. The second turning point, and this one may turn out to be the most significant one of all, money. The Republicans assumed that the nominee of the Democratic Party would be bankrupt by the spring, but thanks to the internet, thanks to John Kerry following Howard Dean and opting out of public financing, and thanks to a loophole in campaign finance that let very rich people pour millions into advertising and vote mobilizations, the Democrats played this game on equal grounds. Third, the conventions. This has been looked at by a lot of Democrats as a missed opportunity for John Kerry, stressing his Vietnam experience, not stressing his Senate record or what he would do. The Republicans came out of their convention with a big lead, which survived until this other turning point, that first debate, that put John Kerry right back into the mix of things. And finally, the question that lingered throughout this campaign, Iraq and terror. If Iraq is seen as part of the war on terror, George Bush should do well tonight. If voters see Iraq as a diversion and a quagmire, a slog, as Donald Rumsfeld called it, that's probably good political news for John Kerry. How this turns out, Wolf, I think we ought to ask the viewers to stick around.
They will be sticking around. We'll be sticking around all these turning points throughout the night. Judy Woodruff is anchoring our coverage from our CNN Election Analysis Center over at the Time Warner Center. Judy, tell our viewers, first of all, what you're looking at and that team of experts with you, what they're doing.
Well, Wolf, this is what we are calling the Election Analysis Center. It's a team of people, a combination of veteran election political analysts and statisticians. And they have been looking at numbers coming in all day long, Wolf, the so-called exit polls. These are interviews with voters as they left the polling places, about 1,500 precincts around the United States in every one of the 50 states and the District of Columbia. So they're looking at that, and it is on the basis of those exit polls, Wolf and Jeff, that CNN is felt comfortable enough to make the calls that you just did, Wolf, and that is in the state of Georgia, in the state of Kentucky, and in the state of, let me get the other, Indiana. Those three states for George Bush, based on exit polls that show a comfortable enough margin that tends to match other information CNN had about the direction those states were going in politically. But on top of that, we are going to be looking at sample precincts and calls coming in from those sample precincts. We are all obviously also going to be looking at the raw vote. The Associated Press tonight is calling in from 3,500 counties across the United States. We're going to be taking in that information, and our team right here in Manhattan and New York City is going to be watching those numbers. We've got layers of information, the exit polls, the sample precincts, and finally the raw vote numbers on top of the expertise of these people, which you cannot underestimate.
All right, Judy, and just to be precise, the fact that we cannot project a winner in Virginia and South Carolina, that simply means that we don't know enough about those two states. Is that right?
That's correct, Wolf. At this point, we do not have enough information to be able to call the result either in the state of Virginia or in the state of South Carolina. That should not be read to mean that either one of these states is too close to call. I will add, however, that the Democratic governor of the state of Virginia said just a couple of days ago, maybe we're going to see a surprise in that state. The public opinion polls in Virginia have been showing a race of somewhere between 3 and 6 points. Closer, of course, than some of these other southern states, but in no way do we have information at this point that would lead us to believe that this is a state that's not going to go to George Bush.
And just to be clear, Judy, because after 2000, I think we want to bring the viewers in as close as we can. If you do get enough data to say the state is too close to call, CNN will call the state that way, correct?
That is correct, and that will be a specific call we make at a point in the evening when we have enough information in from a combination of these exit polls, sample precincts, and the raw vote. When we get enough information in that makes the men and women on this team comfortable to make that call, we will say it is too close to call. But that is not what we're saying at this point about either Virginia or about South Carolina.
Judy Woodruff at the CNN Election Analysis Center, thanks very much. We'll be getting back to you. Let's walk over, bring in some other members of our team, no strangers to our viewers in the United States and around the world, Larry King and Carlos Watson. Larry, what are you looking at this early stage?
Well, I'm looking at, first, this amazing setup we have here tonight. And I think we're going to be here a long time. I know we can't project certain winners in certain areas based on what happened 4 years ago. The question I'd ask you and you, how are we preventing 4 years ago?
Well, we've learned a lot of lessons, Larry, from what happened 4 years ago. The data, the new research that's coming in. This is a much more sophisticated operation, but I think it all boils down to, when all is said and done, is this. We're much more cautious this time than we were 4 years ago. And if we don't know something, we'll tell our viewers we simply don't know. Carlos, tell our viewers what you're looking at right now.
Well, I think we're testing history, frankly, today. History says if you're an incumbent president, certainly if you're a president during war, you've raised a lot of money and you have a lead going into Labor Day, you should win. John Kerry wins. We haven't had a senator get elected in 44 years. Would be the second Catholic to get elected. Wasn't ahead in the polls, even the Democratic primaries coming into this year, January 1st. So a lot of convention will get turned on its head tonight. So lots of big historical importance, not just importance in terms of the 2004.
And what, Jeff, surprised you the most?
That
in this whole campaign?
That after 4 years, when everything changed, every assumption we had going into 2000 had changed. from invulnerability to an attack that we could never have dreamt of, from peace to war, from economic security to anxiety. The country remains apparently evenly divided, with the red and the blue states, by and large, as we showed, lining up pretty much the way they did 4 years ago. You would have thought that those events, those hammer blows to the United States, would have resulted in a political upheaval. Looks pretty much the same.
What's the turnout story?
We don't know specifically what the turnout story is because the polling, the results won't be coming in till all the states are closed, and then we'll get the hard, raw numbers that are coming in. Anecdotally, as we've seen on CNN all day, there are long lines in many of these key battleground states, and you know what? There are long lines in some of the non-key battleground states as well, Carlos. What do you make of that?
Well, I think people are as energized as we've seen in a long time. We might get the highest turnout since 1968, which would be significant. And one of the things I note in my home state of Florida, which Larry knows well as well, close to 2 million people voted early. And I've had a number of people say if that early voting hadn't taken place, the system wouldn't have been able to handle all the people who ultimately did show up today.
And there were reports earlier today about some snafu in Philadelphia. Then they said that didn't happen. Any reports of any major occurrences occurring anywhere that are causing lawsuits and people upset?
It's been going more smoothly than one would have thought, especially when you throw 10,000 lawyers into the mix. They're capable of making mountains out of any molehill. But I think people are surprised so far that it's gone relatively smoothly, especially because people on both sides were so keyed up to spot any instance of voter fraud or voter suppression. And unlike 1968, at the end of that tumultuous year, the electorate was so exhausted that the turnout went down from 4 years ago. I think the one thing everybody expects this year is a turnout way up. And that's something we're not going to know till the end of the night or maybe even tomorrow. And
Our senior political analyst, Bill Schneider, is taking a look at the exit polling data. What's on the minds of Americans based on what we can tell, Bill?
Well, there are three big issues that define this election, three big ones, and they seem to be working in different ways. Let's take a look at our exit poll results. George Bush wanted this election to be a referendum on the war on terror. So we asked people, do you feel safer from terrorism than 4 years ago or less safe? And the answer is 52 to 44 say they feel safer from terrorism. That is good news for President Bush. But another issue, the economy. How do people feel about the nation's economy right now? Only 44% say the economy is in good shape. A majority say it's not good or poor. 4 years ago, 85% said the economy was in good shape. So the economy is working on behalf of Senator Kerry. Two issues, different directions. What's the tiebreaker? How about the war in Iraq? What do voters think about the decision for the United States to go to war in Iraq? And the answer is they're split. 49% say they approve of the decision to go to war in Iraq. 47% say they disapprove. The Iraq issue is an issue that divides the country, but it could be the issue that defines this election.
And we're going to be sharing these exit poll numbers with our viewers around the world all throughout the night. So Bill Schneider will be talking with you again. Do you want to ask Bill a question?
Yeah, these are national exit poll numbers, right? You're not breaking it down by state, and this election is electorally.
That's right.
It's not a national election.
This is the national electorate, and we see three issues pulling the voters in three different directions.
Senator Ted Kennedy is joining us now from Kerry headquarters in Boston. I'll start, Senator. What surprised you, if anything, today?
Well, I think the extraordinary turnout. I know John Kerry was hoping for a big turnout, and there was a big turnout. I think the number of young people that turned out has been very positive and very constructive. Many people thought that the young people really weren't involved, turned off the system, but clearly they want to be involved. They want to be a part of the future. I think that's going to be a real challenge for John Kerry about how you're going to make sure the number of people that turned out in this election are going to be part of the political process over the period of the next 4 years.
Senator Kennedy, you've been with the junior senator from your home state all these many months. How do you feel that he's done over the past, let's say, year or so?
Well, we're very proud of John Kerry. You know, sort of the ripple around here tonight is that we have the Super Bowl champions with the New England Patriots. We have the World Series champions with the Red Sox. And now, above all, we got John Kerry, hometown boy, that's won the presidency. We're very hopeful about it. He has demonstrated, I think, over the period of the last year, the kind of inner toughness, the kind of strength of character, the kind of determination that's going to be so important in a president, in any president, and I think particularly now.